Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another episode of Conqueror's Blade. So, since closed beta is almost upon us, although we don't yet have a date, which obviously I'm as anxious as everyone else to find the date and when we're going to be started, but I think it's safe to say it's going to be pretty soon. And I think once we hit this closed beta, we're going to be getting quite a lot of new players joining the game, many of whom won't have been able to try out the siege tests on the previous builds and won't have been able to try out any of the classes, so won't really know a lot about which weapon choice to make when you start the game. Because when you first load in, you'll have a choice of a male or a female character, and you can pick certain classes based on your gender. And the game gives you a very, very brief description of what the classes are, but doesn't really tell you any of the finer points on them. And that's kind of what I wanted to do in this video. So hopefully, if you're a newer player, it at least gives you a bit of an idea what you might want to aim for when you get into the game. So based on my Conqueror's Blade competition I did the other day, quite a lot of people were interested in the ranged weapons in the game. So that's kind of what I'm going to start with, and I'm going to break down sort of the basically three choices that you have available to you. There is the Musket class, the Longbow, and the Shortbow. Now the first ones to break down are the Longbow and the Shortbow, the two differences and the limitations. Now the Longbow, or just normal bow, if you want to call it that, is a male-only weapon class. So if you want to use the Longbow, you have to play as a male character, and if you want to use the Shortbow, you have to play as a female character. So they're gender-specific classes. But they actually play quite differently. So the Shortbow, to take the Shortbow first, it's a very rapid-fire, relatively low alpha damage weapon. So that means each time it hits, it doesn't hit very hard, but the rate of fire is very quick. It's sort of like arrow, 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 and it can shoot pretty quick. It's almost like a slow machine gun, so it's pretty effective in that sense. It isn't range limited like the Musket class, for example, so you can hit people at extremely long distances, but it isn't very accurate. It has sort of an area aim. It just gives you sort of like an area circle when you're aiming, so it isn't really super accurate, and that kind of makes it hard to target people at distance, even though your arrows do have the range. If you compare that to, say, the Longbow or the normal bow, it has sort of like a pinpoint accuracy aim. It gives you more of a dot once you draw it back. It sort of circles into a dot, and you can aim a lot more accurately. They both have the same range, but realistically the range of the normal bow is higher. The normal bow also has a much higher sort of alpha damage. You know, it hits harder upon sort of each impact. And I suspect, well, I haven't actually worked it out, but I suspect it has a lower damage per second potential. I think the fact that you get that greater accuracy, so you're going to be landing more hits. You can also relatively easily aim headshots with the Longbow in a way you can't with the Shortbow because you don't have that accuracy. So that's going to significantly increase your damage output. And, you know, the extra range that you're effectively getting by that extra accuracy, for me, makes the Longbow the winning class. But I think there's certainly a place for the Shortbow. If you can get pretty close to the combat, you can put in some serious damage pretty quickly. And, you know, because of the sort of much sort of easier way of aiming, you can just sort of hover your circle over the enemy and just keep firing, keep firing, keep firing. You can sort of be focused on looking out for enemy cavalry, looking out for enemy heroes, etc. So it certainly has a place and quite sort of some interesting combinations. And of course, both of them have completely separate class skills. But without wishing to make this video like half an hour long, I'm not going to go down into each of the class skills. It's something you'll just sort of learn as your character progresses, because you don't even unlock that many of them at the start anyway. So that's the two bows. So what about the Musket class? Musket available to both male and female, so you're not specifically limited. It's the same class for both. I'm personally not a fan of the Musket. So how does it work? It's the highest alpha damage ranged weapon in the game. It also has really good weapon penetration statistics. So it's great against heavily armoured units. Particularly as the armour sort of gets increasingly balanced and more armour gets brought in, probably once we start to head into closed beta and open beta, the Musket's certainly going to have its place in terms of its, you know, that instant damage dealing potential. But where it kind of falls down, in my opinion, is its range. It has really limited range, and you know, that's kind of a limiting factor. Range is handy. You know, you can keep yourself much safer if you can be sort of further back from fighting. So it kind of depends if that fits into your playstyle. You know, you've got to also consider that the rate of fire is very, very low. And while it is pinpoint accurate, so you can get headshots, and, you know, and if you do land headshots on people on, you know, particularly on like lighter units like archers and stuff, you'll be pretty much one-shot kill on the, you know, the AI units. So that is pretty good. It does certainly have its place. But for me, I felt the damage output wasn't there. I preferred having the sort of flexibility of more range from the Longbow. So for me, I think it's a good potential if you can sort of get into the playstyle of the close range, but for me, I didn't enjoy it that much. Although I did enjoy, not that I'm talking about class skills, but I did enjoy the black powder grenades as well. They were quite good fun. So that's kind of my very, very brief summary of the range. I played all those classes, and yeah, for me the Longbow was the best, but I don't think the other two are bad classes by any means. I just think they didn't really fit my playstyle particularly well. So once we start to get onto the melee weapons, I think first we'll deal with some of the sort of class-specific ones. So, dual blades, a weird class, very hard to. It's not really like anything else in the game. It's like almost like an assassin class, extreme damage potential at short range. So obviously you have a pair of daggers. So you have no range. You have to be right on top of the enemy to actually begin to get hits. And all the class skills are focused around increasing that damage output, exponentially for short periods. So you can just do a tremendous amount of damage in a very quick period of time. Combined with the fact, because you have very light armor, no shield, no heavy weapons, you're really quick as a class. You're really agile. You can move quickly around the map. You can jump into combat, jump out of combat again really quickly. Really effective as almost like an anti-hero character. Doesn't hold up so well in a shield wall fight. If you've got your NPCs versus the other AI, it doesn't really work so well. But if you see an enemy hero, you can chase them down, use your skills to get that damage output really quickly, get the kill, and then retreat back out again to heal up. So I found it quite good as like an assassin. It even describes it here as suitable assassins and infiltrators. It does fit quite nicely with that sort of playstyle. But remember, female-only class is not available as a male character. So you have to kind of make that decision at the start of the game. Because if you select a male character, you then can't retrain your class skills to dual blades if you want to do later on. It's not possible. You'd have to start a new character. What else is there? So the other two we'll break down are the short sword and long sword. Both classes are playable by both genders, male and female, so it's not a problem with choice. I play both. So how does it work? So to break down the longsword, you're wearing much heavy. You're heavily armored. You have a shield. So you're it's almost like, to use sort of RPG terms, you're almost like the tank, because you have that ability to absorb quite lots of damage. One of your abilities is all about heal, recover, mercy of heavens is all about healing, which is really quite an effective heal on top of your standard heal as well. So it means you can heal your hit points pretty quickly. You can do decent amounts of damage. Your damage output is pretty well average, I would say. You've not got phenomenal amounts of weapon damage. You've not got phenomenal amounts of armor penetration damage either. You've only got a sword, remember. But yeah, it's kind of like the all-round class. It sort of fulfills every role relatively well. Probably perhaps apart from agility, you're relatively slow because you're heavy. You've got a lot of equipment, so you don't have great mobility. The short sword basically takes all those characteristics, trims them down, but gives you a bit more agility in replacement to that. You have your quicker attacks, but you're doing less damage, and your armor penetration damage is that little bit less as well. But you're quicker. You've got that better agility. You can dive into combat, get your hits, and get back out again. For me, I preferred the long sword. The short sword is good if you can sort of prolong the combat against enemy heroes, but the lack of damage potential, in my opinion, makes it kind of easy for people to sort of back away from you to either friendly troops, or to back away so they can heal, or just run away from the fight. So I feel that short sword doesn't have that sufficient damage potential to be effective, or at least that was the case when we played it during the siege tests. It may change slightly during the closed beta, because obviously there's going to be rebalancing and stuff. So that's those two out the way. Now we're going to deal with basically, it's a bit of a categorization to glump these up. Three is the same type, but the poleaxe, not the dual blades, the poleaxe, the glaive, and wherever it is, no, not that one, the nodachi. It's obviously like the Japanese warrior. All of them are relatively long arm type weapons. They have a good reach, but particularly like the poleaxe and the glaive, especially so, they have really good reach. They also have really high damage potential. They hit hard, and they also have relatively, well, not amazing, but they have semi-decent armor penetration statistics on their slash piercing attributes. So that they all kind of fit in, at least in my opinion, to a similar type of playstyle. These are the front line, hard-hitting fighters. You're in the fighting with your own troops, hacking, slashing. Particularly for me, the poleaxe and the glaive, that reach you get means you can actually start getting hit with relative safety, particularly if you've got allied troops with you, if you've got some of your AI troops with you, you know, engaging the enemy, then you can stand a little bit behind the line, swinging your poleaxe backwards and forwards, you know, getting that halberd stuck into everyone, and you can do that without really being hit, particularly if you're fighting sort of sword units which just don't have the reach to hit you. So yeah, I really quite like these classes. I think they're quite effective, give you quite a lot of potential, even if it doesn't always go well. Sometimes you're going to be targeted by a group of archers and you get, you know, filled full of arrows before you even make it to the walls, in which case you'll be dead. But once you get into the fighting, I think the damage potential is nice to have, and that gives you the option of taking down enemy heroes relatively quickly as well, in a way that, say, something like the short sword just doesn't have. So for me, I think these are quite a nice selection of classes to go for if you want to sort of looking at as your sort of starting class. Yeah, I'm sort of torn myself between the poleaxe and the longsword. Don't know, it's going to be a tough one. And finally, perhaps the more unique class is the spear. So at first glance, this looks exactly the same as the poleaxe, the glaive, etc. But it's not. It's got some differences. And when you're on the ground, when you're just as an infantryman running around, yeah, you swing it like a poleaxe, but it just does a lot less damage. It doesn't have particularly high damage statistics. It doesn't have particularly high slashing penetration, armor penetration statistics either. It makes it kind of ineffective. But where it comes into its own, it's the only cavalry-focused weapon in the game. When you get onto a horse, you get two new options, which I think make it nice. Firstly, you get sort of a right-click attack, which is a stabbing attack. So rather than swinging it around, you know, over your head and hitting people with the wood for for no particular reason, you actually get to stab with your spear, revolutionary as that sounds. And that means that, one, you can bring in your much higher piercing armor penetration damage, so it starts to become much more effective against enemy armored units, and the actual damage is higher as well. So for me, once you get onto the horse, that is a really nice attack ability that you get. And I also find the stabbing much more accurate and much more easy to use as well. But on top of that, you basically get a cavalry charge ability. So you can get on your horse, you basically tuck your spear like a lance, and you charge around the map until your fatigue runs out. But in that time, you can do quite a lot of damage. You know, particularly if you can charge through a group of enemy archers, and you know, you're getting quite a lot of increased speed doing this. So it can be really quite effective if you pull all the moves off right. I think the consequence you've got to consider are, though, that during the siege tests at least, the actual horses themselves were really quite weak. So they died really quite easily, and then you sort of back on foot, and that's kind of the end of that. When, you know, the spear class is all about the cavalry for me. That's kind of what makes them excel. So, you know, that was kind of a limitation. You've also got to consider that while it will be better in open field maps, a lot of the maps are probably going to be siege maps, and, you know, how good is cavalry really in a siege map? It's got a lot of limitations, so yeah, it's an interesting class. I think if you want to be cavalry specific, then the spear is really your only option. All the other classes, while can use horses, of course, are really designed to use horses, I feel, as more of a mode of transportation than as a cavalry unit. The spear is the only one that, for me, is focused towards being a cavalry class. So if you're interested in that, that's certainly something to consider. So hopefully that gives you sort of just a little bit of an overview of sort of what the classes are like. That's just from my experiences from playing from all the siege tests. We got access to all the classes at level 30, so that meant we could sort of have a fair sort of go at exploring the different classes and their strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, of course it's just my opinion. For me, I think I'm going to be going for either the poleaxe or the longsword. I've not quite decided yet. I do like the damage potential of the poleaxe, and he does look pretty badass, doesn't he? So I think that's probably my preferred option at the moment, but you never know, it might change as before the closed beta comes out. But anyway, hopefully this video has been useful. If it has, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you have any other questions about the classes, I'm happy to tell you what I know from when I played the siege tests. Subscribe to the channel, because we'll be certainly having lots more Conqueror Blade content once we go into closed beta, and I shall see you all on the next video.